Yay, welcome so
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah, welcome and thank you for being with us today. We're here for Mantras for Peace with Erica Wohldmann, and I'm so excited to see what kind of unfolds in this conversation. Erica, we have a very dear mutual friend, Denise Kaufman, who introduced us, and I wanted to have Erica here because she's an environmentalist, an ecopsychologist, among many other things, just this, what seems to be a brilliant, beautiful portrait of a life listening to nature and the body. And I'm so happy to have you share your gift with us in that sense.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much for having me here.
yeah, we have a really beautiful community of peacemakers who are deeply interested in, I think, how to walk in the world in a more harmonious way.
Mm.
So your way has involved foraging for 6 months and living in the wild, as well as studying to a very deep degree the connections between body and earth. And I'm vastly oversimplifying, of course, but what would you say to someone is the most important aspect of how your work and your life is contributing to peace?
Well, as I think so many of us probably realize, in order to have peace in the world, we have to have peace within ourselves, right? So we're working to create a harmony and balance internally all the time. Someone who's a biologist would call that homeostasis, right? We need to create our bodies naturally like to be in that state of homeostasis. And yet, we're surrounded by so many environmental factors, people in our lives, concrete jungles that we live in, right? It's the sound of cars and traffic that can very easily throw off that internal homeostasis, that state of balance. And so the work to create peace is figuring out how not to let those external factors and even internal factors like rumination and worry and stress and those sorts of psychological factors create disharmony, so that we can walk in the peaceful world we're trying to create. And for me, that's been a lot of different practices. I'm happy to share some of those or talk about, but many practices, including foraging of all things.
You tell me more about that, because I'm guessing that a lot of people who are going to watch this or listen to this have not had the opportunity to even really understand what that means. Like a lot of people don't know the plants in their own backyard, much less can speak to the plants of the forest and know what's okay to eat and what's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you learn?
Yeah.
How did you learn that?
I mostly I learned by taking a leap, of faith and hoping that my the ancestral wisdom that we all carry within us would sort of reveal itself, if you will. But I did grow up with a mom who grew plants in our garden. So she was a farmer and did a little bit of foraging, berries. We picked blackberries and raspberries as a kid, and this sort of things. I grew up in Missouri, and then moved to Boulder, Colorado to go to graduate school. So I grew up, doing a little bit of foraging, but mostly gardening. And I think a lot of people have at least done some level of gardening, whether it's a succulent plant in their window or a full-on kale garden, something like that. Right. A lot of us have had, at least some contact with some sort of plant that we've cared for. And then when I moved to Colorado, I started working a little bit with someone who foraged for mushrooms, with a friend of mine who liked to gather wild mushrooms. And so I knew a couple of mushrooms when I decided to take this trip. So I was teaching a psychology class called Cognition and Food. And it's all about factors that influence our food choices. I think most of us think we eat because we're hungry, right? That's actually one of the least predictors of why we eat. There are so many factors that influence our food choices that we may not even be consciously aware of, including our bodies. We have these very ancient bodies, and biology can't keep up with technology. And so teaching this class really made me wonder whether what it would feel like, really, what my inner state would feel like if I were living in greater alignment with my ancient body. And so in order to do that, I decided I would go and live in the forest for 6 months and forage my food like the hunters and gatherers who brought me into this world, brought all of us, right? We're here because of them.
We wouldn't be here. Yeah,
exactly. If I could live in greater alignment and really understand what that would do for my physical and mental well-being. So that's really when I learned. I sort of had to hit the books as I decided to, allow our shared mother, Aina, as she is called in Hawaiian, allow her to feed me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said you hit the books, but by books, do you mean you hit the forest?
Yeah. So I went into the forest. I did simultaneously hit the books and hit the forest. Yeah. I left with a milk crate full of identification books.
Oh,
I literally took, that was it. Maybe 1 or 2 pleasure reading books, but I went out with some ID books, and I know enough about gardening, right? It needs water. Food needs water to grow. And so do mushrooms. And so I kind of thought about where would it be raining right now? And I grew up in Missouri and moved to Colorado and then lived in California. And so I sort of understood the weather pattern, right? So we get in California, we get rain in the winter. In the Midwest, they get it in the summer. In Colorado, they get it in the fall, right? So I knew I needed to sort of follow the rain. And so I hit the books and I found rainy spots and I started looking for food.
Wow. And what were the changes that you felt in your alignment with, as I love that way you put that, with your ancient body? That's a very poetic way, and poetic and accurate way of
really is, right?
Yeah.
We often, I think in our sort of spiritual selves, we talk about living in greater alignment with our higher selves or our higher spirits, right? And I think about living in a greater alignment with our ancestral ways of being, and the impacts of that were quite vast. So I'll just talk about a couple of them. First of all, psychologists like me, cognitive psychologists like me, we talk about states of flow. And a state of flow is when you are doing a task and you're so absorbed in that task that other tasks or other things around you don't distract you, and that you're sort of in this sort of a perpetual state of joy, right? You've been in a state of flow, a state of bliss and flow, and it feels wonderful. And I think for me, a life became kind of a perpetual state of flow. I was outside all the time, breathing in the volatile oils of pine and spruce and fir that are so good for our lungs and so good for our bodies. Looking for food, enjoying my day. Once I learned enough plants to survive, which didn't take very long because, we are very good at learning when we have to. It became a joyful act and not a chore, finding food, because you start to realize that it's everywhere. And so I had this sort of perpetual state of flow. I wasn't on my computer. I wasn't on my phone constantly. In fact, I hardly had cell phone reception. I checked in every couple of weeks when I would pass through a town with family or people who might have been worried about me. And so, I think that those devices make us, both like literally myopic, right? We are changing the way we see in the world because of these devices, but also I think they make us kind of either myopic in a metaphorical sense. We become much more concerned about what's happening in this digital space, that we forget to kind of check in with what's going on in here and what's going on in our realities and in the people who are around us. And I think even in this last year, I've noticed that even more, right? Because we're doing this.
We're doing on Zoom rather than sitting in the garden having this conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, it does literally cut off our periphery, because we're we're in that tunnel vision. And as a cognitive psychologist, I'm sure that all of that is swirling around in your head and your process of bringing the learning that you absorbed from that time in your life into academia. So, how is that for you? I mean, my impression of academia is not necessarily the most, absorbing kind of environment. So how has it been for you to bring that ancient wisdom into the order and structure of the academic world?
Well, that's a really great question. I mean, I do think there is often a lot more flexibility in what academics are allowed to do than we might remember when we went to school, right? So when most of us are in college, we're taking core classes that are required, and those classes have curriculum that are relatively inflexible. But at this point, I do teach some of those core classes, but I also teach classes like food and cognition that I got to create myself, and best practices in sustainability, which I talk about from sort of an eco-psychological perspective. And I get to I teach a class called Contemporary Trends in Psychology, which includes topics like mindfulness and all sorts of really cool topics. So I have actually been able to bring that into the classroom with relative ease. And the nice thing I think about academia is that I'm not ultimately, I'm not, when it comes to my teaching, I'm not seeking approval from my peers, When it comes to my research, I am, right? But when it comes to my teaching, I'm seeking approval from my students, and they love this stuff.
And engage, the level of their engagement tells
exactly.
you whether
and as
you're
long as they're
it.
excited, the department is excited. And I am in a psychology department, so that I think helps the situation a little bit. Yeah. We study humanity.
Yeah. And so there's a bit more squishy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure.
I guess what comes up for me around that is that you, it just seems very valuable to play that role almost as a translator between a way of life that is more ancient or indigenous, which you had the opportunity to experience, which most of us who were raised, in square, perpendicular streets and square houses and cars and technology and all of the things that, as you mentioned before, limit our view and our sense of connection to the whole, that you could then interpret, not interpret, but to express the value of that way in a context that could be understood and even like respected or appreciated. It just that I want to thank you for doing that work and being a bridge.
Thank you for that. Yeah. It feels important, actually. It feels like we are in a time when, this work in particular is needed. I think so much of what we've done, so much of what humans have done has been, as we're now seeing, kind of problematic. But it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Saying it.
Yeah, humans aren't inherently bad for the planet. It's not actually in our nature. And I feel like we can easily sort of revolve back. Right?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah. So if we could, I want to ask you two questions to complete our time together. One is, if you could normalize one thing, one behavior, like wave a magic wand and normalize one thing that would get us to that state that you're talking about, what would that be?
I think it's really simple, because we already all do this. We all eat every single day, thankfully, when we choose to, thankfully. And so for me, when I take a leaf off of the ground and put it into my mouth, right? I pick a plant from my yard or from my garden or from my refrigerator. I think of it as communion with the earth. I am literally taking earth body and uniting it with mine. And if we could normalize that, instead of these little round wafers that we put into our mouths when we usually take communion, I feel like it would just be such a potent reminder of our dependence on the planet. And it just offers an opportunity for us to pause and just even be grateful for the life that feeds us. I feel like that's one thing I would like to normalize for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say yes to that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. The second question is, if you could empower wave your magic wand and empower everyone with one tool, like a technique or a tool that would, again, lead us to that revolved state of connection, what would it be?
I think this one probably wouldn't even involve gardening or foraging, although, planting plants, I think, is the solution to so many of the problems we face. But I have been doing a loving kindness meditation that I adapted from Jack Kornfield's work. And I feel like my compassion muscle has been so well trained. And of course, there's always more work to do, but doing a loving kindness meditation improves our selective attention. It improves our ability to focus. It improves our ability to problem solve. It makes us feel good. It reduces stress. There's so many benefits to various kinds of meditations, but in particular, the loving kindness meditation is really useful for increasing compassion and making our compassion more effective. And the reason I think that's so important right now is because we are seemingly divided in a really deep way right now. And not to say we haven't been divided in the past or maybe always divided, but I think right now, one of the questions I'm asking is, how does a stranger become someone who is welcome on my couch, right? Like needs a place to stay and becomes welcome. And I feel like if we can figure out how to have more compassion and how to treat others like our family, like our brothers and sisters, then we can get through a lot of the problems we have to solve right now. And until we do that, those problems are still going to persist. And that may be the demise of our species. And I'm okay with that too. But we are so smart.
Yeah.
We're so smart. We should be able to figure this out. Yeah.
God willing.
Yeah.
So a loving kindness meditation to strengthen our unfortunately often atrophied compassion muscles.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I love the way you're just admiring the teacher in you, because you ticked off the benefits. You're like, this is my research. Tick, tick,
you just have to know.
Very delightful blend of compassion and nerdiness. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I couldn't agree more. And really, that's what this whole Mantras for Peace project is about as well. And our global community of peacemakers committing to 5 minutes a day of chanting. Could be any mantra, but the one I teach particularly is the Sanskrit mantra Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu, which is, may all the beings in all the worlds be happy. So it's very much
it's perfect. Very much a loving kindness mantra.
It's precisely a loving kindness mantra, and it is another strategy for the same thing. And I think that's why I love these interviews. I love this project because the people that I get to talk to, we're all doing the same work in different ways. And it's such a delight to get to hear your voice and amplify your voice and connect your voice with all these amazing people that are doing similar but different work, with that wish that we all grow in compassion and keep the love alive.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Erica. This has been just a bright delight.
Yeah, it certainly has. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and that all of the people who you are reaching out to are also doing. It's so important, and I'm so glad to know that they're all out there doing that work too.
Yeah, it just feels like a really nice thing to be engaged in. It just feels like a really nice thing to be engaged in creating community and putting the teachings and the good words out there, because it can be, it's just, life is overwhelming, and the negativity can be really depressing. So I'm grateful to amplify the positive, deep, meaningful conversations. Yeah. And wow, just what a beautiful being. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, so for everyone watching, we'll put Erica's bio and her, amazing website and speaking TED Talks and all the good stuff that she does, so you can check her out more and drink from the cup of her wisdom of the ancient body.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Shine.